The next unit operation tool we'll look at is duplicate key detection that allows us to find duplicate records in our data set. When we select duplicate key detection from the analysis ribbon, we get a series of dialog boxes that allow us to define what criteria we have for identifying duplicates, and it will output those duplicates to a new database. Well, let's take a look at how this works. Starting in our original database, we select from the analysis ribbon duplicate key detection, and we get this dialog box, and we're going to choose output the duplicate records into a new database called duplicate records. And for our key, we're going to be looking for duplicate invoices. We're looking to see if an invoice was paid twice. So the key fields here are the vendor number and the invoice number. We can also choose the fields to display. In this case, we'll display all the fields from the original data set. Click OK. And we see right here this invoice 9718846 for Advanced Consultant was paid twice. Now what's curious is we have different invoice dates and different amounts, and we find that's a little bit odd. We note that, and once again, Advanced Consultant, a payee that we saw in their data visualization, has popped up again with a new red flag. The next tool we'll use is summarization, and we're going to combine several tools here. Once we get our summary, we're going to sort it based on one of the key fields, and then we're going to direct extract some information out of that summary. So we begin with summarization. Once again, we're working on the analysis ribbon. We select summarization. We get a dialog box that allows us to specify how we want the summary created and give it a file name. So let's see what that looks like. Return to our original database. We select, once again, we're still on the analysis ribbon. We select summarization. We get this dialog box, and we're going to summarize around vendor number and payee. We want to total the amount, and this is going to be our vendor summary. And then we click, and down here we can choose different statistics. In this case, we're interested in just the sum of the amount for this purpose. So we get this database, and now we want to sort it. And what I like to see when I sort is the highest number at the top. So we'll click on this, and we've got the lowest number at the top, so we'll double-click again, and now we've got the highest number at the top. Now, here we see something interesting. Here's Advanced Consultant. They've popped up a couple of times, and here they are again at the top of our list at almost $1.9 million and 23 records. So we're saying to ourselves at this point, Advanced Consultant has accumulated enough red flags that they definitely have attracted our interest. So we can quickly extract these records by clicking on the hyperlink right here, which allows us to display all of the records out of the original database for vendor A130 Advanced Consultant. And now we can save that to a new database to do additional analysis later on. So here's a recap of what we did. We double-clicked twice on sum to sort the highest number to the top for amount, and then we clicked on our hyperlink on 23, created a new database, and saved it. The next unit operation we'll look at is the fuzzy logic tool. The fuzzy logic tool is similar to the duplicate key detection. In fact, it keys off that, but in this case, instead of finding exact matches, it can find families of similar records. And it looks a bit like this. Once again, it's on the analysis tool under duplicate key detection, but we select fuzzy duplicate, and it will allow us to specify what fields we're going to match on, as well as the percent of match that we're looking for. So let's see how this works. In this case, we're going to start in our vendor summary, and we're going to look for vendors that have similar names, and that's the text field payee. So we go to the analysis ribbon, select duplicate key, fuzzy. We want fuzzy matches. We're going to look for an 80% match, which is the default probability, and we're going to look for matches on the payee field, which is our text field. And we're going to call this fuzzy duplicate 80 because we're going to repeat this in a minute. And we do that, we find some interesting things here. And notice that one of the fields that we have now in this display is the similarity field. So in this case, we have a case where Cash Inc. We have some exact matches here. But down here we have Polygun, and it matches Polygun with 2 N's with a 90% match. And Matt Cash and Company matches Matt Cash Company with an 85.7% match. And once again, we can hyperlink to any of these transactions if we want to pull them out. Now let's repeat that, and let's see what happens when we select 60%. Duplicate key, fuzzy, payee, and let's set this slider to 60%. And we'll call this fuzzy duplicate 60. And you can see we've got quite a few more transactions show up here. Cash and Company matches some other things, not just Cash and Company, but Cash Co., Cash and Co., Cash Inc., Matt Cash and Company, Matt Cash Co., the Matt Cash Co., Reed IM. We have several different spellings of Reed IM, Luke Hare Co. So we can see that we've got quite a bit more information in this fuzzy duplicate 60. And it certainly should concern us that we're seeing payees named Cash. That should concern any auditor. So we sort of file that piece of information away. Not to mention this down here, Crooks Inc. and Crooks R Us. So quite a bit of interesting information from the fuzzy duplicate match on the vendor summary. And we show here that we've got quite a few red flags in our output. So benefits of duplicate key detection using fuzzy logic. Duplicate key allows us to find exact matches, but fuzzy logic allows us to find records of varying similarity, which we can actually control the degree of similarity we're looking for to increase the probability of detection or to minimize false positives. The next tool we'll look at is we're going to repeat importing, but this time we're going to import a text file, and then we're going to join it to one of the databases that we've created. Now let's suppose that we have our vendor summary now, and the question has come up, gosh, are all these vendors authorized? So we send off to the supplier quality group and ask for the approved vendor list, and they send us this lovely text file. They send us this lovely text file over here with quotations and commas and things like that. Fortunately, we can import that into IDEA and clean it up a bit and make it more usable. So let's do that. Once again, we go back to our Home tab. We go back to the desktop. We get our Import Assistant dialog box. This time we're going to select a text field. We click our Browser button, and now we want the Approved Vendor List 2016 TXT. We open that file, click Next. Now we get that, and we know this is a delimited field because there's commas here. It's a comma delimited text field, so we select delimited, which is the default. Comma also happens to be the default, and we can see here a couple of things. First of all, it's correctly separated out the vendor number and the payee name, and we also see here that Supplier Quality Assurance didn't help us out by putting a field name in the top row, so we'll leave that unchecked. But over here, we can put our own field name in. So we'll just call this field VIN num, and this one VIN name. And we can add fields, which we don't want to do here, so we click Next. We can enter an equation. Not going to use any of this. And let's just finish. And now we have the approved vendor list for 2016, all cleaned up, vendor number, vendor name. which correspond to vendor and payee in our original database. So what we can do now is we can join the approved vendor list to the vendor summary and determine if there's any vendors in our vendor summary that aren't on the approved vendor list. So to do that, we go back to our vendor summary right here. We go to analysis. We're back on the analysis ribbon, and we select the join function. We're going to join two databases. And it's interesting to note that we're now joining databases from two different sources, one from Excel, one from text. But using IDEA, we can join those two together to develop some interesting results. So now it's already selected vendor summary for our primary database for us. So we have to select a secondary database. In this case, we're going to select approved vendor. And we're going to look for records with no secondary match. So we want any records that show up in our vendor summary, any vendors that show up that don't have a match in the approved vendors list. So we've selected this, and we're going to call this unapproved vendors. Okay, so now we select a field to match on. In this case, we're going to use the vendor number. So we're going to match vendor in the primary field to VENNUM in the field we just imported, in the database we just imported. We click OK, and here we find there's a whole series of vendors that don't match. Now, interestingly enough, here's one that here's Advanced Consultant, our old familiar friend. And here's some cash. They all have the vendor number M100, but they've got different names: Cash Back, Cash Only, Crooks Incorporated, Matt Cash and Company, The Cash Company. And then we have this one other one, Show Me the Money, over here. Which so we have a bunch of interesting results here, some red flags that we'll want to look into a little bit more. And this is a summary of how we did the join. Join, select a primary database, secondary database, what type of match we want, what field we want to match on, and we get our output. So the benefits of importing a text file and completing joins. Well, first of all, we easily cleaned up a rather messy text file, and it also allows us to take that text file and export it to other software. If we wanted to use that text file in, say, Minitab or some other type of software, that might be a little messy to export, but we can actually bring it into IDEA and then export it out into a clean format that's amenable to other types of software. We can also compare data from different sources, and we can build a new database using fields from different sources. The next field we're going to look at is Visualize, which is a data visualization tool, but in this case it allows us to create custom dashboards from scratch. And it'll look something like this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this to figure out who authorized those advanced consultant transactions. Now we could also use the summarization for the same task, but in this case we're going to do it with data visualization. So we return here, we go to our advanced consultant database that we saved earlier. Looks like this. And in this case we're going to go to the analysis tab, select visualize, and once again it's going to look at our database and do some computations on its own. And in this case it allows us to look at this. So we're going to select a new dashboard, and what we want here is we want a bar chart. We're going to group it by auth, which is the authorizing official for our transactions, and we'd like a sum on the amount, so we know the total that's approved by each of our authorizers. So that looks pretty good. That looks like what we want, and we'll save that. We'll select the this one chart format in this case, and here we have a rather interesting result. It looks like all our advanced consultant transactions were approved by one of four authorizers: WN, WJN, W.N. and W.J.N. which begs the question, are these actually the same person? And you can see here we could have gone through and added some statistics to our field too if we wanted to. And we'll go back and let's just do that. Let's show how that would occur. So we return to our chart, and here we can take the field amount and we can calculate the net value. We can take the field amount. We can calculate the average value. Let's select the minimum value. Amount. Average value. So we have the minimum, the average, and the maximum. Well, there's some statistics that give us a pretty good idea of the range. Our transactions in this data set range from 2,000 to over 97,000 with an average here, pretty high average of 81,682.07. All right, at this point we still have two statistics left. One thing that might be interesting is the number of records. So we can select amount and simply select the number of records there, and we have 23 records. And one thing that might be interesting is the number of unique invoice numbers. So remember that was an issue. So we'll select the field invoice and ask for the number of unique values. And you see that's 22. So it tells us what we already learned from the duplicate key detection, that we've got a duplicated value somewhere in this data set. Once again, we can save this as a dashboard. So we'll call this the Advanced Consultant Auth Dashboard. Save it in our audit records. The next step is to filter by criteria. At this point, we've identified that there's something interesting about this WN, WJN combination. So perhaps we would like to extract all the transactions from the original data set that were authorized by this individual, because we now have a red flag. So what we're going to use is the criteria tool, and we're going to build an equation that's going to allow us to select all the WJN, W.J.N, WN, W.N. transactions and put those into a database. Let's see how that's done. In this case, we return to our original database, Arizona Payments 2016. And over here on the properties side, we select criteria. And this brings up the equation editor. And this is a handy tool. We can see we have several things here. We've got our equation block. We've got some operators. We've got all of our fields in the data set down here, as well as some useful functions. And we not only have the functions, but over here as we select the functions, we get a description of the functions in the box on the right. So in this case, we're looking for the different configurations of WN. So we'll start with the auth field equal to, and this is a text field, so we put it in quotes, and we'll look for WJN, or auth equals just WN, or auth equals W.J.N. or auth equals W.N. And we can press this key right here, and this will check to make sure we have a valid expression. In this case, it's a valid equation. So we click the checkbox. And here are all the transactions that were approved by some combination of the WJNs. You can see it's scanning down this field. We got what we wanted. Now in this case, we're simply looking at our original Arizona Payments database filtered. But if we want to bring this off to a data set for later analysis of WN, we can use direct extraction. And that's this key right here on the Analysis tab. So we click Direct Extraction, it copies our criteria we created, and we'll give this a name. WJN WN authorized. So now we've created this field with 224 transactions approved by some combination of the WJ and WN. Okay, so let's talk about some of the benefits of custom dashboards, filtering, and extraction. It allows us to filter records by specific criteria or formula to get additional insights, but we can also extract those filter records into a new database to continue our analysis. The next set of unit operations we'll look at is appending fields and using criteria and equation editor again to get some additional insights out of those fields. So what we're going to see here is when we go to our advanced consultant database, and we'll show you that, we'll see that the invoice numbers are not unique, that there's some extra characters in some of them, and we're going to use the append field function, the equation editor, to extract just the numbers out of the invoice field. So we return to advanced consultant, and we see here when we look at the invoice field that some of these, like this one here, this one has a dash and a space in it, this one has a space, this one has a dash. These numbers are kind of similar, and that's interesting. What we can do with the append field function is we can create a field that's just the numbers out of the invoice field. So we go to data, we select append, a new field, we give it a field name, and we're going to call it n_num, just the numbers. It's a virtual numeric field. We want 0 decimal places, and now we'll use the equation editor to define what we want it to look like. And what we want to use is this number called just numbers, which allows us to returns all the numbers leading and trailing from the specified string or field. So we'll use just numbers on the invoice field. We have a valid equation. We select, and now we have this new field indicated in teal over here that is our invoice numbers, but with only the numbers. All the spaces and characters have been removed. All right, another example of using criteria would be to select the cash transactions. We found those, so we'll show you another use of the equation editor. We noticed that we had quite a few different configurations of cash. There's another criteria that's very handy. We'll clear this one, and we'll start. Another function that's available in equation editor is the isIn function. And the isIn function searches for a specified text string anywhere within a character field. So we say isIn, and we define the field cash, comma, and we're looking in payee. So we'll get any payee that has cash in it. And let's look for capital cash too while we're at it. So we'll use OR, isIn, cash capitalized in payee. We have a valid equation, and we select that. And here we get this whole selection of Cash Inc., Matt Cash, Cash Inc., Cash Co., Cash Only, Cash For Me, all these different cash. So once again, we can direct extract that to cash transactions. Now we have another subset database we can use for additional analysis. So we can append fields. We can use the equation editor. It allows us to append a variety of field types. We can append numbers and characters, dates, different things, and to use the equation editor to filter, combine, perform calculations or other operations on our data to create new types of fields, new values. And also we can filter the database with the equation editor to select data of interest. The next unit operation we'll look at is gap detection. Gap detection looks at sequences of numbers and determines if any gaps exist in the sequence. In this case, we're going to look at these interesting invoice numbers from Advanced Consultant and determine if there's any gaps in that sequence. Now, normally, when we as auditors get a sequence of invoice numbers from a vendor, we would expect to see gaps in the data because as they process invoices, they'll be assigning a sequential number and sending them to various customers. So we normally expect to see a lot of gaps in invoice numbers. And we'll do that. We'll select the gap detection tool. We'll look at inv numbers, the numeric field that we just created with the append function, and we'll look for any gaps in that sequence. So let's do it. Let's go to Advanced Consultant. We're on the Analysis ribbon again. Select Gap Detection. In this case, we're going to use the envnum field. We're going to call it Gap Detection. And here we have the unusual output that there are no gaps in the sequence of invoice numbers from Advanced Consultant. And that would sort of suggest that we're the only customer that Advanced Consultant had. This is another red flag would have. Now, if we were looking at check numbers, we could use gap detection. Normally in a sequence of checks, you don't expect to have many gaps, maybe a few at the start and the end because of timing issues, but normally we don't expect to have any gaps. And if we find gaps in a large sequence of check numbers, we might want to investigate that. That would be a red flag. So, no gaps in the sequence of invoice numbers. Gap detection allows us to find any kind of anomalies in sequences of numbers. Again, sometimes we look for gaps. We're expecting to find gaps. Other times we expect to find no gaps.